Yesterday you guys learned all about the evils of communism and the death and destruction that it wreaked upon Russia. Today we're going to learn about the 1920s. Remember, after World War I, the U.S. did not join the League of Nations. The U.S. was the most powerful nation in the world, and all the allies owed money to the United States. Germany also owed a lot of money to the United States. World War I led to so much hatred in Europe between the Germans and the other countries in Europe, between the people who lost World War I and were penalized by the Big Four, and the winners of World War I. The Germans were in debt and bitter. They couldn't pay the $33 billion they were insisted on paying. Inflation soared in Germany, and the German economy fell to pieces. It collapsed. In 1923, Germany defaulted on their payments and had to stop paying the money that they were supposed to pay to the countries of Europe. The economy couldn't generate the funds. The Germans were suffering a major depression, and the Germans wanted revenge against the European powers that put them in that place. The truth of the matter is they'd put themselves in that position, but they weren't willing to admit it, trust me. France had taken the Ruhr Valley, R-U-H-R Valley, off of Germany, and it was full of good industry. In 1923, they'd taken it with the aid of Belgium and Italy, and Germany was getting saltier and angrier as the days passed. France made allies against Germany. They made allies with Belgium in 1920, with Poland in 1921, with Czechoslovakia in 1924, with Romania in 1926, with Yugoslavia in 1927. Germany was getting ticked off. All these countries that surround them were becoming allies with France, and none of them would support Germany in any way, shape, or form. The Germans were suffering and getting madder and madder, and they looked for a new leader. Italy had screwed up. They were allies with Germany until the beginning of World War I, and then they remained neutral until years into the war. They were morally confused, economically drained after World War I, and they needed a new leader. They had lost confidence in their king, and there was again a power vacuum. A socialist, we talked yesterday about socialism, newspaper editor named Benito, B-E-N-I-T-O, little Benny, Benito Mussolini, M-U-S-S-O-L-I-N-I, Mussolini, organized something that he called the Fascist Party and promised to take hold of the government, to keep it out of the hands of the communists, and to rebuild the Roman Empire. Fascism, though, is basically a form of communism. Fascism, F-A-C-I-S-M, fascist, F-A-C-I-S-T. Fascism is a form of socialism, which allows people to keep their private property but give up all of their other freedoms to the government. Mussolini had a massive amount of followers because he was promising them the entire world. He and his followers formed an army and marched on Rome in 1922, and King Victor Emmanuel III invited him to form a new government. He said, "If you think you can do it better than I am, go for it." And he abdicated the throne. Mussolini became a dictator, took over, and began to build Italy into a major power under fascism. Italy became a major world power. And then the real problems started to happen. The German government had collapsed at the end of the war. They had reformed into something they called the Weimar Republic. Weimar, Weimar Republic. Weimar. That had taken the place of the former German government, and the German economy was slowly recovering. Unfortunately, they couldn't pay off their loans. They had been penalized a lot by especially France and the other countries that had won the war, and they were bitter and they were in debt, and there was a massive atmosphere of unrest and unease in Germany. That left power open for a revolutionary like a little man who had fought bravely in World War I and earned the highest German honors in the war, was injured. He wrote books about socialism. He was a painter. He joined the German Workers' Party, the National Socialist Party, also known as the Nazi Party, but turned the Nazi Party into a terrorist organization that scared people into being their followers, that was slick and disgusting with fanatical racism, a hatred for especially Jewish people, because the Jewish people had money after the war and moved in and tried to rebuild the economy for their own profit. He thought the Jews had stolen everything from the German people, and he hated Jewish people, fanatically hated and was against Jewish people. He also hated black people and many other ethnic groups. He hated the intelligentsia of other countries. Those are the smart people, the professors and the college graduates. He hated democracy. And as a form of socialism, the Nazi Party came to power. They formed and started a revolt against the government, but that revolt failed and Hitler was sent to jail. When in jail, he wrote a book. That book was called Mein Kampf, Mein-Kampf, Mein Kampf. Remember, these are German names. I think it means my struggle, but I can't remember for sure. Don't ask Kiara, because that book is not well loved by the German people or Americans. It was a book that was part autobiography and part a history, a skewed history, a false history of the German people. He said that the Germans were the noblest race of people, that they had the greatest history of all people, and were destined to rule the world. He was a great speaker, a massively brilliant orator, and he was elected in 1933, of course, after he was out of prison, as Chancellor of Germany, which is basically President of Germany. And he took the power off the German people and became a dictator. And as a dictator, he forced World War II into happening. Germany had a lot of broken philosophy in these years. There were philosophers like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and Sigmund Freud, and they were existentialist philosophers. Existentialist philosophy believes that there is no truth and no ultimate reality. Nietzsche, 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 proclaimed in his writing that God was dead. Of course, they were all atheists. Kierkegaard, 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 said that man must take a leap of faith into the unknown, if they were to achieve anything. And Sigmund Freud came up with something called psychoanalysis. He believed that we were slaves to our subconscious mind, that mind that works behind our conscious mind. He believed that not reason, not faith, not the conscious mind, but the subconscious. All the things that have happened to us in the past and turned us into what we are controlled our actions, the subconscious, and we were slaves to that subconscious. He came up with something called behavioral psychology, or Freudian psychology, and he believed that man had no soul. These philosophies made men easy targets for Marxist thinking. God is dead. There's your atheism. You must take a leap of faith. Into the unknown, there was nothing to believe in. And that man wasn't responsible for his own actions. He was just an animal driven by his past experiences. These philosophies made men easy prey for Marxist and socialist thinking. Now in America, there were many men who defended the truth and fought for the good and fought for the right, like J. Gresham Machen, R.A. Torrey, Billy Sunday, Rodney Gypsy Smith, which you guys know of, G. Campbell Morgan, and Harry Rimmer. They were all ministers and Christian philosophers that wrote and supported the Word of God and American thought and love for America. America was a different place from Germany in the 1920s and a way different place from Russia. It was a decade of optimism. We call it the Roaring Twenties. Excellent industry and agriculture was going on. We were thriving after the war. We were the strongest economy in the world. We were the leading industrial nation in the world. We were the leading financial center in the world. We were the world's bank at the time. And on top of that, there was a massive cultural revolution. There were a number of revivals and mass evangelism in the early 20s. The most famous evangelist was an ex-baseball player who found the Lord after being drunk all day and having a rough time. He sat down at a ministry, like a camp meeting type thing that was in a city, and found the Lord, came to the Lord. He was an ex-baseball player. His name was Billy Sunday, and he was an animated preacher. He would go from town to town and build a platform out of wood and sawdust. He would run and jump and scream and yell and preach from that platform, and many, many, many people came to the Lord. So there was great industry, great revival. There was also great heroes and great culture during this age. Baseball came to happen during this age, during the 20s especially, and matured into a sport, into a national pastime. The first transatlantic flight, that means the first flight across the Atlantic Ocean by an airplane, happened in 1927 when Charles Lindbergh, Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh, took the first unassisted airplane flight across the Atlantic Ocean. He became a national hero. Lucky Lindy is what everybody called him. Lucky Lindy. This was an era of prosperity. Americans, the factory system was working. They were building cars. The Ford Model T was affordable, quickly produced, and everywhere, millions of Model Ts were built. There were low credit rates, low interest rates, so anybody could borrow money. There was a lot of frivolity and people, buying creature comforts for themselves, clothes and appliances and things that they really couldn't afford, but there's easy credit, so why not put it on credit? People worked hard, but the economy was worked well enough that there were people enough to work in the factories, and the factories were successful enough that people had more free time. to do things like go to baseball games or go to the nightclub and go dancing and things like that. And people had more free time, and it became the Roaring Twenties, an era of good feeling in America. And in the process, people began to turn a little bit away from God. But then the economy collapsed under the weight of bad mismanagement of money. The stock market collapsed. Herbert Hoover was president, 1929. The stock market collapsed because of things like easy credit, because of bad practices in the stock market, because people, were still kind of operating on that wartime economy where they needed to build things during the war. They didn't have as much need for things after the war. So there was massive amounts of surplus being built up and nobody to buy it. And the economy, the stock market fell apart. $30 billion were lost in just weeks. People stopped loaning money, and credit, that easy credit, completely disappeared. Unemployment soared to 25%, and 13 million people went out of work. Herbert Hoover was a good president and worked hard to relieve this problem, but he was blamed for it. The next president that was elected was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt. He created what we call the New Deal. Massive government job programs. The government supported the people. It regulated the government, regulated the banks, regulated industry. The government did. The government spent a lot of money that it didn't have, but it borrowed from other countries. It ran on credit, and it still runs on credit now. But it didn't really work. Still, at the end of the New Deal, 9 million people were still unemployed. The other 3 million were pretty much being supported by government jobs. FDR also went on and recognized the communist government in Russia because he wanted to trade with Russia, because he saw economic possibilities with Russia. And the Depression not only affected America, but it spread across the world. We'll talk a lot more about it tomorrow. Thank you for paying attention, following along with your questions, your lecture questions, and studying for your quizzes. This has been History with Mr. E.